I want you to picture a specific document. It's probably sitting in a fireproof box or some deep drawer somewhere in your house.
Hmm.
It's got a heavy seal, maybe some, archaic font on it, and your signature is right there at the bottom. And it says, in no uncertain terms, that you are the owner of your home.
Right. The deed.
The deed. And for most of us, that piece of paper, that's the finish line. It is the tangible proof of the American dream, or really the universal dream of just having security.
It's the ultimate psychological anchor.
Yeah.
We view that deed as absolute. It's the concept of fee simple ownership, which is, the highest form of ownership known to law.
Right. Fee simple. But today, we're going to sort of pull back the curtain on that idea. We're going to talk about the invisible string that's attached to that deed.
The one that never gets cut.
Exactly. The one financial obligation that never, ever ends, even after the mortgage is dead and buried. We are talking about the bill that comes in the mail once or twice a year, the one that, if you ignore it long enough, proves that you might not be the owner after all.
Yes.
We are doing a deep dive into property tax.
And it is arguably the oldest, and I would say certainly the most controversial, relationship between a citizen and the state. And you are so right to frame it as a challenge to the very concept of ownership.
It feels that way.
Well, the central tension we are going to explore today is exactly that. Do you actually own your home if the government can take it away from you because you missed a payment to the local council?
It's a terrifying thought when you really sit with it. I mean, you can have zero debt to any private lender, a bank, whatever, but you still have this perpetual lien held by the state.
Precisely. But before we get too existential, and don't worry, we will definitely get to the renter of your own home argument later.
Oh, we're going there.
We have to. But first, we need to understand that this isn't just about the annoyance of writing a check. This is a deep dive into the engine room of civilization.
That's a great way to put it.
Property tax is the fuel for the things we completely take for granted. Schools, police, fire departments, roads. And as we were looking through the sources for this dive, what really struck me was just how wildly different nations are in deciding what a piece of land is actually worth.
It's chaotic. It really is. So here's our mission for this session. We are not just skimming the surface. We're going to unpack the actual mechanism, the black box of assessment that determines your bill.
The math behind the madness.
Yes. And then we're going to hop in a time machine, go all the way back to 6000 BCE to see how the Sumerians handled this without spreadsheets.
I'm excited for that part.
Me too. Then we're going on a global tour to see who pays what, why a renter in London pays the tax while the owner skates, and why the lack of property tax in China is actually, causing this massive economic crisis.
And finally, we will confront the dark side.
Right.
We'll look at these equity theft cases, specifically a really harrowing story out of Michigan that went all the way to the Supreme Court, asking if the government is stealing from its citizens under the guise of taxation.
It's an incredible story. So let's unpack this. Section 1, the mechanics. What exactly is this beast? Because when I look at my tax bill, it feels like a distinct species of financial pain compared to, say, income tax or sales tax.
It is distinct, and you're right to feel that way. At its core, property tax is what economists call an ad valorem tax.
Ad valorem. Okay, let's translate that.
It just means according to value.
But that's the rub, isn't it? Value is subjective. My income tax is math. I made X dollars, I owe Y%. The math is, it's absolute.
Right, it's based on a transaction that actually happened.
Yes. But property tax is an opinion. The assessor thinks my house is worth X.
That is the fundamental friction point. That's where all the appeals come from, all the anger. It is a tax on an unrealized gain. You haven't sold the house. You haven't realized that money.
I haven't seen a penny of it.
But the state is taxing you on the asset's theoretical market price. And the scope of this is usually something called real property.
Let's define that clearly, because real property sounds redundant. Like, what, there's fake property?
Well, in the legal sense, real property, or real estate, is the combination of the land itself, the dirt, plus what they call the improvements.
The building.
The building, the garage, the driveway, the swimming pool, basically the immovable man-made objects.
And this is where it gets super tricky for businesses, right? I was reading about the distinction between real property and personal property. If I'm a homeowner, it's simple. The sofa is personal property, the living room floor is real property, but for a factory.
Oh, is a litigator's dream. I mean, it's a nightmare for the business owner and the assessor, but a dream for the lawyers.
Ha, I bet.
Imagine a massive automotive factory. You have a robotic assembly line bolted to the floor. Is that robot real property, part of the building, and therefore taxable at the higher rate?
Or is it equipment?
Or is it personal property equipment, which is often exempt or taxed at a much, much lower rate?
Yeah.
Billions, and I mean billions of dollars in tax revenue hang on that definition.
So if I bolt it down, the assessor says tax it. If I put it on wheels, the company says exempt it.
That's essentially the game, yes. And this is why you see these endless court cases over things like heavy machinery, telecommunications towers, even billboards. Is a billboard an improvement to the land or just personal property on the land?
Wow. I never even thought about that.
But for the average listener, you're right. The focus is the land and the building.
Okay. Now, we need to be really clear about what this isn't, because that helps define it too. This isn't a tax on rent.
Correct. A rent tax or an income tax would be based on the income flow. An ad valorem property tax ignores whether you are making a single dollar from the property.
So you could have a giant, beautiful skyscraper that is 100% empty, generating $0 in rent.
And you would still owe the property tax based on that building's theoretical market value. It's a tax on holding the asset, not on using it to generate income.
Okay. And this is also distinct from something called a land value tax, or LVT.
The Georgia Stream.
The Georgia Stream, yes.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Right. LVT is a favorite concept of many economists. The idea is that you only tax the dirt, the land itself, and you completely ignore the value of the building on top of it.
Why would you do that? What's the point?
The theory is that this encourages development. It incentivizes you to use the land for its highest and best use. If you own a vacant lot in the middle of downtown, you're paying the same tax as the guy next door with the 50-story office building.
So you're being penalized for not building something.
Exactly. You aren't penalized for building a nicer apartment complex or improving your property. The tax is purely on the locational value of the land itself. But for the most part, current systems tax both the dirt and the bricks.
Okay, so let's get into the math that confuses everyone. Millage, or mills. It sounds like something from a Dickens novel, but it's the standard unit of measurement for property tax in the U.S.
It does sound archaic, doesn't it? A mill comes from the Latin word millissimum, which just means thousandth. So 1 mil is 1,000th of a currency unit. Or, put more simply, it's $1 of tax for every $1,000 of assessed value.
Okay, so a simpler way to think about it is like a percentage, but moved one decimal place over.
That's a good way to look at it. So 1% is the same as 10 mils.
So if my mill rate is 20, that's a 2% tax rate.
Exactly, you got it. But here is the dynamic that people miss, and this is where all the politics comes in. Your tax bill is a function of two separate variables. You have the assessed value, which is what the house is worth, and you have the millage rate, which is what the government needs.
And crucially, these are set by two different groups of people.
Correct. The assessor, who is often an independent or elected official, determines the value. They're supposed to be objective. Then you have the city council, or the school board, or the county commissioners, the politicians, and they determine the budget. And that budget sets the millage.
Let's play this out with an example, because this is where the revenue neutrality trap happens. This is the shell game.
It absolutely is.
So let's say I live in a town where every single house is worth exactly $100,000. And the town needs, say, $1 million to run the schools for the year.
Okay. So if there are 1,000 houses at $100,000 each, the total tax base is $100 million.
Right.
To get $1 million in revenue from that $100 million base, the rate needs to be 1%, or, as we now know, 10 mils. Your bill is $1,000. Simple.
Simple enough. But now the housing market goes crazy. A big company moves to town. Everyone wants to live here. All the houses double in value. Now my house is worth $200,000.
Right. Now, in a pure, honest world, the town still only needs $1 million to run the schools. The teachers' salaries didn't double overnight. So because the values doubled, the millage rate should be cut in half.
It should drop from 10 mils to 5 mils.
It should drop to 5 mils. And your tax bill should remain exactly the same, $5. This is what's called a revenue neutral adjustment.
But that rarely happens. I have never seen that happen.
Rarely. What usually happens is the council keeps the rate at 10 mils, or maybe they're feeling generous, so they drop it slightly to 9 mils to look like heroes.
So they can send out a mailer saying, we cut your tax rate.
Exactly. We cut the millage. But because your assessment doubled, your tax bill effectively skyrockets. They get a massive windfall of revenue without ever technically voting for a tax hike. They just rode the wave of assessment increases.
That is the silent tax increase.
Yeah.
The politicians can stand up and say, we didn't raise rates, while the assessor is the one who has to hand out all the bad news.
It creates a very convenient scapegoat dynamic between the treasurer's office and the assessor's office.
It's brilliant politically.
It's devious.
Now, not all dirt is created equal. We have to talk about classification. My house isn't taxed at the same rate as the shopping mall down the street or the vacant lot next door.
No, and this is where tax policy becomes social engineering. Governments group properties into different classes, residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and so on, and they apply different rates or assessment ratios to each.
So, like, a factory might pay a higher rate than a family home.
Often, yes. The idea is that commercial and industrial properties put a greater strain on public services. More traffic, more water usage, more need for fire services. But the most interesting lever they can pull is how they treat vacant land and vacant properties.
You mentioned Israel in the notes. This is a fascinating example of using tax as a weapon against hoarding.
Right. So Israel has a chronic, long-term housing shortage, especially in its major cities. So the government looks at its toolkit, looks at the tax code, and says, how do we force people to actually rent out their empty apartments?
Get that supply onto the market.
Get it onto the market. Their solution was simple: classification. If you have an apartment and it is occupied, you pay the standard residential rate. If you leave that apartment vacant, the rate doubles.
So they're actively fining you for inactivity, for not participating.
Effectively, yes. They are making it financially painful to sit on empty housing supply in the middle of a housing crisis. France did something very similar back in 1999.
What did they do?
They introduced a specific tax on vacant properties, but only in cities that had tight housing markets. They targeted it, and they defined vacancy as being empty for more than 2 years.
Did it work?
The studies show it did. Vacancy rates in those targeted cities dropped by about 13%. It proves that property tax isn't just about revenue, it's a policy lever. You can use it to incentivize construction, or you can use it to penalize speculation.
But there's a counter-argument there, isn't there? I mean, if I own the property and I'm paying my taxes, why is it the government's business if I use it or not?
It's a very strong counter-argument.
Maybe I'm saving it for my kids to use in a few years. Maybe I'm renovating it slowly as I can afford to. Why should I be punished?
That is the core libertarian critique. Why should the state dictate the utility of your private asset? But the counter-argument, the one the government would make, is that land is a finite resource, especially in a city. By hoarding a piece of that finite resource, you are imposing a cost on society. You're driving up rents for everyone else. So the tax is there to compensate for that negative externality.
It's the use it or lose it philosophy applied to real estate. Okay, so that's the mechanics. Value times millage equals your bill. But this system didn't just appear in a vacuum. It is, as you said, ancient.
It's the bedrock of organized society. You simply cannot have a state, you can't have a civilization without a way to fund it. And for most of human history, land was the only wealth you could see, measure, and, well, tax.
So let's jump into the time machine, section 2. We are going all the way back to 6000 BCE.
Ancient Sumer.
We're in the city-state of Lagash, which is in a modern-day Iraq, and archaeologists found these clay tablets, literally tax records baked into the mud. But what's so fascinating isn't just that they taxed, it's how they managed the logistics of it.
Right. They didn't have computers. They didn't have a central database they could just query.
They had something much cleverer, a system called bala. It means rotation. The administrators realized that trying to tax the entire city at once was an impossible logistical nightmare.
You'd need an army of tax collectors. You would. So they rotated the burden. They would tax one specific district or area of the city each month.
That is incredibly sophisticated. I mean, it smooths out the revenue flow for the government, and it smooths out the administrative workload.
It is the earliest example we have of bureaucratic efficiency. It's brilliant. Now, if we move forward a bit to ancient Egypt, the system becomes even more rigid and, frankly, more respected.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the scribes.
The guys with the papyrus scrolls.
In Egypt, literacy was power. Maybe 1% of the entire population could read and write. The scribes were the tax assessors. And they weren't just low-level clerks. They were the absolute elite of society.
So the taxman was at the top of the social ladder.
Absolutely. They would go out to the fields and assess the grain, the cattle, the oil, the beer. Everything that was produced was taxed.
And the enforcement was brutal, from what I understand.
Extremely. This wasn't a voluntary contribution. If you couldn't pay your tax, you were brought before the court. There are records and even paintings on tomb walls of farmers being beaten for tax evasion. This was the extraction mechanism that built the pyramids.
So no appeals board.
No appeals board. Your appeal was hoping they stop hitting you.
Let's fast forward a few thousand years to the medieval period. We usually think of kings just seizing whatever wealth they wanted arbitrarily. But the sources mention William the Conqueror in the 1070s. This feels like a turning point for data.
It is the birth of the surveillance state. It really is. When William conquers England in 1066, he needs to know exactly what he just bought. What did I just win?
An inventory.
Complete inventory. So he commissions the Doomsday Book.
Which sounds incredibly apocalyptic.
The name was a metaphor. The judgment of the book was said to be as final as the last judgment on Judgment Day, but really it was a database. He sent commissioners into every single shire in England to record who owns this land, how many plows are there, how many cows, how many fish ponds.
So before you can tax, you have to know. Information is the absolute prerequisite for taxation.
Exactly. You can't tax what you can't see. William effectively digitized England on parchment so that he could extract wealth efficiently. But the pushback to this centralized power is really what gives us modern democracy.
King John, 1215, the Magna Carta.
Yes. We think of the Magna Carta as this grand human rights document, but at its heart, it was largely a tax revolt.
Really?
The barons were sick and tired of the king levying scutage, which was a tax in lieu of military service, whenever he felt like it, to fund his wars in France. They forced him to sign a document saying he could not raise these kinds of taxes without the common council of the realm.
No taxation without representation starts right there. It's not just an American idea.
It starts right there in a field at Runnymede. It sets the precedent that the power to tax requires the consent of the taxed. And that idea evolves. So by 1689, after the Glorious Revolution, the king's powers weakened even further. No taxing without Parliament's permission, period.
Which brings us perfectly to the American experiment. So, the Pilgrims land at Plymouth in 1620. They are freezing, they are starving, half of them are dying, and almost immediately they start writing tax laws.
It was about survival. At first, they tried a communal system where everything was shared. It failed miserably. Nobody wanted to work.
The classic tragedy of the commons.
Totally. So then they allocated private plots of land. But they realized they needed a fort for protection, and they needed a militia. So the Plymouth colony implemented a property tax on land and also on faculties, which was basically your ability to earn an income.
And the Puritans in Boston, a few years later, they took it a step further. They used property tax to fund the church.
Which is so ironic today, since churches are almost universally tax exempt. For the Puritans, the church was the state. There was no separation. They also used property tax to fund the first public education in America. But there's a detail in the Boston records that I just love. They used the tax system as a form of welfare state.
The exemptions for widows, right? I saw that.
Yes. If a widow with children couldn't pay her property tax, the assessors, who were often also the sheriffs, would not only forgive the tax, but they would provide her a stipend from the collected pot to live on.
Wow.
But it went both ways. If you were a vandal, if you broke a street lamp or damaged a public bridge, your property tax bill would go up to cover the cost of the repair.
That is hyper-local accountability. You break it, you buy it through your tax bill.
Exactly. But the defining moment for the U.S. system, the real reason my school is funded by my property tax and yours by yours, comes down to the massive philosophical feud between Hamilton and Jefferson.
This is the clash of the titans.
It really is. On one side, you have Alexander Hamilton, the Federalist. He wanted a strong, powerful central government. And he believed the federal government needed to have the power to levy direct property taxes to fund a national army and a national debt.
And Jefferson, the agrarian, Democrat, Republican, hated this idea.
He saw it as a return to the tyranny of King George. Jefferson wanted revenue to be raised locally and spent locally. He believed that keeping the money close to the people was the only way to preserve democracy and prevent a powerful, distant government from emerging.
And looking at the U.S. today, Jefferson won that fight.
Decisively. Hamilton actually tried to implement a federal property tax in 1798. It was a complete political disaster. It triggered something called the Fries' Rebellion in Pennsylvania, where farmers were literally attacking tax assessors.
So it didn't go over well.
It was a catastrophe for him politically. And since then, the federal government has largely stayed out of the property tax game. Today, something like 97% of all property tax revenue is collected by and stays with local governments. Only about 3% goes to the state level.
But that victory, that Jeffersonian victory, has a really dark double edge, doesn't it? Because if schools are funded locally by local property wealth,
Then rich towns have rich schools and poor towns have poor schools.
and the inequality is baked in from the start.
It's exactly. The Jeffersonian victory is the direct root cause of the massive educational and municipal service inequality we see in the United States. By tethering school funding to local property wealth, you essentially ensure that a child's geography is their destiny.
It's a tough pill to swallow. So we see how the U.S. ended up here. But the rest of the world handles this in wildly different ways. Let's start Section 3, the global tour.
And we have to start with the United Kingdom because their system is a total mind bender for most Americans.
The council tax. Okay, so in the U.S., the rule is simple. The owner pays. If I rent a house to you, I, the landlord, get the tax bill, and I probably just roll that cost into your rent. But in the U.K.,
In the UK, the occupant pays. The resident. If you are a renter in a flat in London, you get the council tax bill. It comes in your name. You pay it directly to the local authority. The landlord doesn't see it.
that fundamentally changes the psychological relationship. The renter is now directly funding the local services they use.
It does. It directly aligns the burden with the user of the services. Trash collection, police, streetlights. But it completely separates it from the owner of the asset. And if a property is empty, the owner then becomes liable for it.
Ah, okay.
And it's highly controversial, not least because the bands, the value brackets they use to calculate the tax, haven't been updated in England since 1991.
Wait, 1991. You're telling me people are paying tax based on what their house was worth when Nirvana released Tues? Never mind.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Imagine the distortions that creates. A neighborhood that was cheap in 1991 might be incredibly expensive now, but the residents are still paying a tiny amount of tax, and vice versa.
That's insane.
And it gets worse.
Yeah.
If you think that's bad, let's look at Germany. They recently had a full-blown constitutional crisis over this exact issue.
A crisis.
Yes. Until 2018, West Germany was using property values from 1964, and East Germany was using values from 1935.
1935. You're telling me that in 2017, someone in Berlin was paying property tax based on a pre-World War II, pre-Berlin Wall valuation.
That is correct. And think about how much neighborhoods have changed, especially in a city like Berlin. A wealthy district in 1935 might be a working-class area now, or a rundown area from the Cold War might be the trendiest, most expensive place to live. The inequity was absolutely staggering.
So what happened?
Well, the German Constitutional Court finally stepped in and said this is ridiculous. They ruled that it violated the principle of equality enshrined in their constitution. You can't treat people so differently based on completely arbitrary ancient data.
So they have to reassess everything, the entire country.
It is a massive, gargantuan bureaucratic undertaking. They are trying to revalue millions and millions of properties to implement a new, fairer system by 2025. It's creating chaos and confusion, but it's a necessary step to restore any kind of fairness to the system.
Now let's talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to global economics. China. We often hear this line that China doesn't have property tax.
That is, for the most part, technically true for residential homeowners. Because remember, in China, the state officially owns all the land. Individuals get 70-year leases on it. Historically, there has been no annual holding tax on homes.
Which sounds great if you're a homeowner. No annual bill from the government.
It sounds great until you ask the next logical question. So how does the local government pay for the subway and the parks and the schools?
Right. How do they?
They've been using a system that the media calls land finance. The local governments make almost all their money by selling new 70-year leases to real estate developers. They sell the dirt to pay for the city.
But that's a Ponzi scheme. That's not sustainable. You need to keep selling more and more land at higher and higher prices to pay the bills. What happens when you run out of land or the developers stop buying?
That is exactly what is happening in China right now. The real estate market has cooled dramatically. Major developers like Evergrande have gone bankrupt. Land sales have plummeted.
So local governments are broke.
They are suddenly insolvent. They have billions and billions in debt from building all that infrastructure, and their primary revenue stream has just dried up because they don't have a recurring, stable property tax to fall back on.
So the lack of a property tax is actually a massive destabilizing force for the entire Chinese economy.
It creates a dangerous boom-bust cycle. They have been talking about introducing a real property tax for over a decade, but they're terrified that if they do, It will cause housing market values to completely collapse. They're trapped.
Wow. Let's pivot to our neighbor to the north, Canada, Vancouver specifically. We talked about classification as a policy tool, but they took it to a, well, some would say xenophobic, others would say protectionist level.
It's the foreign buyer tax.
Yeah,
Vancouver in the 2010s became what people call the safe deposit box for global capital.
I remember hearing that.
Wealthy investors from abroad were buying up condos, often with cash, and just leaving them empty. They weren't living there, they were just parking their money in a stable asset. And it was driving prices up so high that locals, nurses, teachers, firefighters couldn't afford to live in the city they served.
So the government of British Columbia stepped in and slapped a tax on them.
A big one. A 20% tax on the purchase price if you are a non-resident foreign buyer. And they added an empty homes tax on top of that. And the fines for trying to dodge it are massive, over $100,000.
What was the message there?
It was a very blunt instrument designed to send a clear message. Housing in our city is for people to live in, not for parking cash.
And did it work?
The consensus is that it cooled the very high end of the market, yes, but it raises that fundamental tension again. Is a house a home, or is it an asset class like stocks or gold? And what right does the government have to decide?
A question with no easy answer. Now, for the listener who's hearing all this and just wants to opt out entirely, where are the no-tax zones? Where can I move?
If you are willing to relocate, you do have options. In the Middle East, Kuwait has no property tax thanks to its oil wealth. In Africa, Mauritania.
Mauritania. Lovely this time of year, I hear.
Or, if you prefer Europe, there's Malta. The Faroe Islands, which are part of Denmark but self-governing. In the Pacific, you have the Cook Islands or Palau, and, strictly speaking, American Samoa has no tax on privately held land.
So you basically have to go to the edges of the map to escape the tax man.
Usually, yes. These places tend to fund themselves through other means like natural resource wealth, very heavy import tariffs, or direct subsidies from a larger nation. There's no free lunch.
There never is. Okay, Section 4, valuation and calculation. We've talked a lot about market value, but looking at the global landscape, there are other ways to skin this cat.
The biggest alternative, and one that many economists prefer, is rental value. Places like Hong Kong, Singapore, and parts of India, they don't ask, what could you sell this house for?
They ask a different question.
They ask, how much rent could this property generate in a year?
That feels, I don't know, fairer somehow, more connected to reality.
It connects the tax to the actual income potential of the asset. In Hong Kong, property tax is effectively an income tax on rental yields. It forces the tax to reflect the economic utility of the building, not just a speculative bubble price that might be temporary.
But then you have the other European model, the cadastral value. I know Spain does this.
The valor cadastral,
yeah.
yes. This is an administrative value assigned by the government, and it is almost always much, much lower than the actual market price.
So you might buy a villa for, say, $500,000.
But the official valor cadastral for tax purposes might only be $100,000.
So your annual tax is low, which sounds great.
It is, but the trap snaps shut when you go to sell it, because the government knows the cadastral value is fake. So when you sell that villa for the real market price, they hit you with the plusvalia tax, a separate tax on the increase in the value of the land since you bought it.
They get you coming or going.
One way or another, they get their share.
Let's talk about exemptions. Who gets to ride for free in all these systems?
It's a pretty consistent list across the globe, and it's basically a laundry list of what a society values. Government buildings are almost always exempt. Taxing, City Hall is just moving money from the left pocket to the right.
Right. Pointless accounting.
Exactly. Religious institutions, almost universally exempt. Mosques, churches, temples, synagogues, public burial grounds, educational institutions, scientific institutions.
That one can cause a lot of tension in college towns, right? If you have a massive university like Harvard or Yale that owns 60% of the land in a small town.
It is a huge problem. The university uses the roads, the police, the fire department, but it pays zero property tax on its academic buildings. The local residents who might be struggling to pay their own bills have to subsidize the university's massive footprint.
So what do the towns do?
It leads to these huge political battles, where towns try to force universities to make pilots, which stands for payments in lieu of taxes.
Please, just give us something.
Exactly. They are voluntary contributions, but they are negotiated under a lot of political pressure. Help us pay for the services you use, or things might get difficult for your next expansion plan.
Gentle shakedown.
Some would call it that, yes.
Hmm.
Germany also has an interesting exemption for nonprofits pursuing charitable purposes. And Slovakia has one for properties covered by diplomatic privileges, but only if there's reciprocity. We won't tax your embassy if you don't tax ours.
Makes sense. Now we have to go to the dark side. Section 5. We started this whole deep dive asking, do you really own your home? And for most of us, that's a philosophical question. But for some people, it becomes a legal nightmare.
This is where the renter of your own home argument stops being theoretical. We need to look at it through the lens of tax foreclosure. We need to talk about what happens when you don't pay.
The outline highlights a specific case in Southfield, Michigan, the Raffaele case. This story, when I read about it, it made my blood boil.
It should. It's an unbelievable story.
Yeah.
So a man named Uriah Raffaele, he was an elderly engineer. He bought a small rental property in Southfield for about $60,000. He paid his property taxes, but one year he made a mistake. He miscalculated the interest on a late payment.
Okay, so a simple mistake. How much was the mistake?
The initial error was $8.41.
$8, not 800.
$8. He missed it. He didn't know he'd underpaid. The county started adding penalties, interest, fees. The debt grew to about $285. Eventually, the total delinquent amount hit around $900.
Still, $900, that's a car repair. I can put that on a credit card.
For most people, yes. But because of that $900 debt, Oakland County in Michigan foreclosed on his property. They seized the house, and then they sold it at auction for $24,500.
Okay, that's bad. He lost a $60,000 investment over a $900 debt. But here is the crucial question. The house was worth way more than the $900 she owed. Did they give him the difference back?
No. And this is the critical distinction that listeners need to understand. If the bank forecloses on your mortgage, they sell the house, they take what they are owed, the remaining mortgage balance, and they are legally required to give you the change. That surplus is your equity.
Right. It's your money.
It's your money. But in Michigan at the time, and in about a dozen other states, with tax foreclosure, the government takes the house, sells it, and keeps the change. They keep the entire surplus.
So Raffaele lost his $60,000 property, and the county not only got its $900, but it pocketed an extra $23,600 in profit.
That's right.
That is state-sanctioned theft. You were stealing the equity, the life savings of a citizen.
That was exactly the argument that was made. It's a practice called home equity theft. The Pacific Legal Foundation, a nonprofit law firm, took this case all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court. And they argued it violated the Takings Clause of the Constitution. The government cannot take private property for public use without just compensation.
And the just compensation here would be paying him back his surplus equity.
Exactly. They argued that the taking wasn't the house, it was the debt. And the compensation should be everything above and beyond that debt.
Did they win?
They did. In a unanimous decision in 2020, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled that the county cannot keep the surplus equity from a tax foreclosure sale. It was a massive victory for property rights. But this practice still exists in other states. It is the ultimate proof that your ownership is conditional.
It's absolutely terrifying, and it links directly to the broader issue of gentrification, what some people call the paradox of prosperity.
Right. It's a very similar mechanism, just slower. You buy a house in a cheap, maybe rundown neighborhood, you fix it up. Your neighbor fixes theirs up, the neighborhood gets trendy, coffee shops open, boutiques, the value of your house triples.
Which should be good news. I'm rich. I'm a real estate genius.
On paper, you are rich. In reality, you are cash poor. Your assessment triples. Your tax bill triples. And if you're a retiree on a fixed pension or a working class family whose wages haven't tripled, you literally cannot afford the tax on the home you own free and clear.
You are priced out of your own living room.
You're being forced out by your own success.
Yeah.
The tax system forces you to sell your home and move. It displaces the very people who built the community and gave it its character.
It's a cruel irony.
It is. And some jurisdictions try to fight this. We mentioned Spain offers tax relief for residents over 65. California famously has Proposition 13 from the 1970s, which severely caps how much your assessment can rise each year, regardless of what the market does.
But Prop 13 has its own huge controversial side effects, right?
Well, massive ones. It basically starves local governments of revenue, and it discourages people from ever moving. Because if you sell your house and buy a new one, your tax base resets to the new, much higher market value. It creates all these weird distortions.
It seems like there is no perfect system.
No. Every single solution seems to create a new, different kind of problem or distortion.
So where does this all leave us? What does this all mean? We've gone from soil tablets in ancient Iraq to the Supreme Court of Michigan. We've seen taxes used to fund Puritan churches and to punish empty condos in Vancouver.
We have seen that property tax is so much more than just a bill. It is the legal and financial definition of the relationship between the citizen and the state. It is in many ways the price of admission to civilization.
But I want to leave the listener with that provocative thought we promised at the very beginning, the one that gets to the heart of it.
Go for it.
We cling to this idea of ownership. We work our whole lives to pay off a mortgage so we can hold that deed and say, this is my land, this is mine. But if you have to pay the government a fee, a tribute, every single year for the privilege of staying there, and if they can take it all away, all of it, if you miss that fee.
Are we all just tenants of the state, renters with a lifetime lease?
Is the property tax a rent we pay to society for the roads and the schools and the police? Or is it proof that true, absolute ownership is a myth? That at the end of the day, the government is the final landlord?
It's a question that might keep you up at night. But at least now, when that bill arrives in the mail, you'll know exactly the history, the math, and the deep, complicated politics behind that number.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
Until next time.